Hey guys, what's up? Mr. Brotherton here, and we are going to be talking about energy flow through ecosystems. So, one of the things we talked about at the beginning of this class was that all life forms need energy to survive. Okay, so in order to survive and propagate your species into the future, while you're alive, you need to be taking in energy to help build your body to sustain you. So there's a couple different ways that animals can do that, but the basic premise here is that all energy on Earth ultimately comes from the sun. Most ecosystems are sustained due to energy that we're receiving from sunlight. There's a couple exceptions there, and we'll talk about that here in a second, but mostly energy is coming from the sun. So what are the ways of obtaining energy? There's two different ways. There are producers and there are consumers. So producers are also known as autotrophs. So the word troph, or the suffix troph, is from a Greek word that means to nourish. So if you are an autotroph, that means you can nourish yourself. So you are a producer because you're producing biomass for other creatures to come and eat, but really you're producing it for yourself. Okay, so you can obtain energy from a non-living source like sunlight. And usually they're capturing that through photosynthesis to make sugars like glucose that we can come and eat. There are other producers that actually use chemicals instead of sunlight to actually make simple sugars. So these are going to be like your plants, your algae, and some forms of bacteria. And your consumers, these are the ones you're probably more familiar with. These are known as heterotrophs. So hetero means different. Troph means to nourish. So these need to eat other animals, so a different animal, in order to nourish themselves. So they're going to obtain energy from living or once living organisms. So they're going to be eating organic molecules made by other organisms. These are going to be things like us, okay, fungi and animals. So at the beginning of this, I talked about there's actually another thing that doesn't really use sunlight, and that is chemosynthesizers. All right, so the thing about both types of producers is that they're both using non-living sources for their energy needs. Okay, so sunlight for one, chemicals for the other one. So photosynthesis, you already know this, based on sunlight. Photo means light. Synthesis, this means to put together with light. So they're putting sugars together with light. Whereas here, chemosynthesis, this means to put together with chemicals. So they're using sulfur-rich compounds to actually put together things to make sugars. So examples, these are your green plants and cyanobacteria. Remember yesterday I told you briefly about how chloroplasts in plants actually used to be free-living cyanobacteria. And there still are free-living cyanobacteria that are not inside of plants. They were the first photosynthesizers. And over here on the chemosynthesis side, we have the deep sea vent bacteria. These things are going to be living inside of tube worms, and some of them can live on their own, and they're going to be breaking down sulfur-rich compounds to make sugars. So over here we have CO2 plus H2O, we get glucose and oxygen due to photosynthesis. Over here on the chemosynthesis side, this is a bit more complicated. We have CO2 plus water, plus hydrogen and sulfur and oxygen, and you get sugar plus sulfuric acid. So sulfuric acid is the waste product here. Sugar is our product. Over on the photosynthesis side, sugar is the product. Oxygen is the waste product. So how do consumers get their energy? Well, they have to eat other things. So they break down the macromolecules that are inside other organisms to generate this thing called ATP, which is the universal energy currency of the cell. And we call that cellular respiration, which you are familiar with a little bit from our biogeochemical cycles. And we'll really dive into that process of cellular respiration, what ATP are, later in the course. So there's four types of consumers: herbivores that eat only vegetation, carnivores that eat only meat, omnivores like you and me, we eat both meat and vegetables, and then there are detritivores or decomposers, and these are living off of dead matter. Okay, so they're going to eat dead materials. So this happy little cute red panda over here, he is currently acting in a herbivore role, but I'm pretty sure that they are actually omnivores and eat little bugs and stuff too. All right, so we'll skip that for now. So what is a food chain? You should be familiar with this. A food chain is basically showing a single flow of energy from our bottom trophic level, so our producers, all the way up to the final consumer. Okay, so grass, grasshopper, mouse, and owl, that is a food chain. Okay, so it's just showing one single flow of energy and how that moves in an ecosystem. Now, a food chain is not the most accurate depiction of what's actually going on. It's a nice simplified model for us to look at, and it helps humans kind of understand what's going on. So we can break down these trophic levels, right? So the first trophic level is going to be your producers. The second trophic level is going to be your primary consumers. So make sure you don't get this confused, okay? Level 2, your second trophic level, is going to be your first consumer, okay? 2, even though it says it's the second trophic level, it's going to be your first consumer. Why? Because the very first energy source is going to be your producer. So the first trophic level is always producers. The second trophic level is always going to be your primary consumers. So your secondary consumers are going to be your third trophic level, and your tertiary consumers are going to be your fourth trophic level. We could even maybe add a quaternary consumer, and that would be our fifth trophic level. So the energy is always flowing upwards, all right, in these trophic levels. So would you be able to classify each one of these types of consumers? So a grasshopper, that's going to be a herbivore, a mouse is going to be an omnivore, and an owl is pretty much a carnivore. All right, so a food web is actually a more accurate model of what's going on. So this is basically multiple food chains interacting all at once, and we're trying to show those interconnections there, you know, those complex predator-prey interactions and symbiotic interactions and all of that stuff we were talking about with the last concept. So this is a more accurate representation of what's happening in an ecosystem. And this is something you really, really need to know, okay? We can't continue to have consumers go on infinitely, and that's because there's a reduction of energy at every single level. So there's a reduction of available energy. Why? So as energy is flowing from organism to organism, the first thing that gets to eat it is going to use some of that material that it ate for metabolism. It's going to use some of it to build biomass, okay, to build their muscles, their bones, etc. And then ultimately a lot of it just gets lost as heat. Which, you know, if you snuggle up against a cat or something, the cat is warm, and that's because some of the calories it's burning are just being lost to the world as heat. And every single animal, not just cats, are going to be doing that. So we call this the 10% rule, or the rule of 10. If we take averages of how much energy is available from level to level to level to level, it's being reduced by 90%, or we can say that there's only 10% of that initial energy that's available to the next trophic level, okay? So we can look at this in our next slide here. So how does that population amount going to be affected by this, and what's going to be the relationship between trophic level and population size? Well, if you imagine that the producers have 100% of the sun's light available to them to make energy, so here we have 100%, then the primary consumers are only going to be getting 10% of that initial energy. And then our secondary consumers are going to only get 10% of what these primary consumers had. Okay, so now we're going to keep reducing that, and our secondary consumers, or our tertiary consumers, are only going to get 10% of what these guys had. So as you can imagine here, if we start with 100 here, now we're down to 10. By the time we get here, we're to 1. And all of that keeps reducing as we go up. So population size is going to be limited at each trophic level, and the higher you get up to the top of here, the smaller your population size is going to be, because there's just not enough available energy left over. And we can represent these different ideas through what we call trophic pyramids. So this right here is what's known as an energy pyramid. So an energy pyramid is going to represent the amount of energy that's available at each trophic level, and that's always going to get smaller as you go up due to that rule of 10. Okay, so 100% of the sun's light may hit Earth, and actually producers only convert about 1% of that available energy into into usable forms of biomass for other things to eat. One measure of energy is what's known as a joule. This is very similar to a calorie. Okay, so if 1 million joules of sunlight are hitting the earth, only about 10,000 of those joules are going to be converted into something usable by this grass here. And by the time it gets up to our rabbit here, there's only going to be 1,000 joules of energy left. See that 10% reduction. By the time we get to our secondary consumers, there's only 100 joules left. By the time we get up here to this hawk, there's only 10 joules left. Okay, so there's a 90% reduction, or there's only 10% left as you go up each one of these trophic levels. Make sure you understand that, okay? Another type of trophic pyramid we can use is a biomass pyramid. So this is going to represent the total mass of living organic matter at each trophic level. Once again, these tend to get smaller as you go up to the top consumers. The biomass gets smaller and smaller because there's less energy available, and if there's less energy available, then there's less stuff to build your body. Now, this isn't always the case. Some aquatic ecosystems, the biomass pyramid can actually be a little bit reversed, and that's because phytoplankton and zooplankton are so small and they get eaten so rapidly that their biomass can actually stay pretty low, but they're reproducing so quickly that there's always that energy available there for your primary consumers, secondary consumers, etc. But generally it's going to look like this, where there's less biomass as you go up your pyramid. And another way we can represent these ideas is through what's known as a numbers pyramid. So this is basically counting our population size. So this is going to represent the number of organisms that are going to be at each trophic level. One of the things I told you a couple slides ago is generally those numbers are going to get smaller as you go up. So if you look here, if you look in a grassland, we have all of this grass, then there's going to be fewer insects, then fewer predatory insects, and then maybe only one bird is able to live. Now, the thing here about our temperate forest is see how few trees there are. Well, a tree is really, really big. Okay, so the biomass there would still be huge, but there's only 200 trees that can support a whole lot of insects. Okay, so there's different models to represent these different trophic levels. So here's a final trophic pyramid to kind of put all this stuff together. So at our first trophic level here, we have grass. At our second trophic level here, we have a grasshopper. At our third trophic level here, we have a mouse. And at our fourth trophic level here, we have an owl. So these are our blue things. Okay? So those are the level numbers. And then here is what they do. So grass is going to be your producer. A grasshopper is going to be a primary consumer. A mouse is going to be a secondary consumer. And an owl is going to be a tertiary consumer. So how is the percent of available energy going to change? Well, it's going to be reduced every time we go up. So if the grass has 100% of the available energy, how much does the grasshopper have? 10%. Okay, so now the mouse is only going to have 10% of that 10%, which is going to be 1%. And now our tertiary consumer is only going to have 10% of that 1%, so it's only going to have 0.1% of the energy available to it. Okay, so life needs energy to sustain itself, and as you go up your pyramid all the way from your producers to your tertiary consumers, etc., just remember that that available energy is going to be reduced, and guess what? That reduction of available energy helps to drive competition, which is going to drive evolution. And maybe another way, instead of competing for those resources, you form symbiotic relationships to help each other out. Okay, so all of the stuff we've been talking about is ultimately driven by the needs of life for energy. All right, that's all I have for you guys today. Stay curious. Thank you. Bye.